All right. Hello, lovely people. Welcome to the City of Pittsburgh Gender Equity Commission May 2022 meeting. I am Morgan Overton, acting chair of the Gender Equity Commission. Happy Election Day. If you haven't already, go out there and vote. I have my little sticker proudly. So does Jesse. You have until 8 p.m. to vote today, y'all. So go make it loud, make it proud. And we are going to go ahead and get started with a roll call, and I'll just start in the order of who's on my screen. Commissioner Hale.
Present.
Commissioner Ramey.
Present.
Commissioner Newman.
Present.
Commissioner Manuel.
Present.
Commissioner Coffey.
Present.
Commissioner Overton, that's me. So we're a little itty bitty group of people today, but we're dynamic. We're tiny but mighty. So thank you, Marcel, for sending me the minutes for April. I just haven't had a chance to put them in the drive for people to look at. Did not want to give people 12 hours to look at the minutes, so I will pop it in there, I promise, and we can take a vote next month. But for any new business for our committees, is there anything that the good of the order should know about with any new developments? Workforce Equity Committee, I know we do have an exciting development. So Janet, do you mind sharing?
Yeah, I'm very excited to announce that we are going to have our next training. It will be Monday, May 23rd. We are trying something very new, and we hope that it works. We want people to spend their lunch with us, lunch and learn, and that is having the Work Smart workshop as we're partnered with AAUW. This again is to help educate women on how to understand and know their value, know their worth, know what to ask for in regards to compensation, whether you're seeking a new position or seeking a promotion or a new position within your current organization. The pay gap for women continues to be exacerbated. And so we need to maintain our focus. We are going to continue to maintain our focus, and you will be able to go on the website of the GEC and click on the link and be able to sign up for the upcoming Lunch and Learn. It will be Monday, May 23rd, 12 noon. Just spend 1 hour, enhance your KSAs, knowledge, skills, and abilities, and help the Gender Equity Commission and AAUW by participating in the Work Smart workshop to increase your knowledge about how to ask for more money, which will help eventually close this gender pay gap. So that is something that we are looking forward to. And for all of those that have wondered, will we ever do in-person Work Smart workshops? And the answer is yes. They are forthcoming. We are projecting them to be in August, September, and October of this year. And there will be more information about that on the website of the GEC. So in-person workshops are forthcoming, but in the meantime, join us online, 12 noon on Monday, and help us close this gender pay gap. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. And I just want to make a huge PSA, and I know we sound like a broken record when we say this, but if there are any organizations that would like to partner with us and be the co-host of a Know Your Value session, we want you. So I should have mentioned that you can contact us at genderequity@pittsburghpa.gov. But the more the merrier. And this whole movement, it isn't just about the pay gap, but it's about, economic justice across the board, especially after this pandemic. So thank you, Janet, for continuing to power through making these sessions happen. Joe, with that being said, Governance and Leadership Committee, is there anything we should know about for May?
No big updates. The biggest, really, we're probably going to shift our meeting dates to accommodate more of our committee. Yes, we are still looking for nominations from the floor for a chair for the commission. And so that vacancy needs to be filled as soon as possible. Although we think you're doing a great job, Acting Chair Overton. We want to be in compliance with our bylaws. So that is the biggest ongoing piece of our work right now.
Thank you. Yes, Jessie.
You know, Delisa and I didn't get a chance to meet last week. So Delisa, I'm sorry that we didn't get a chance to connect on a governance issue, but I just wanted to ask if anybody has been successfully using the Google group to email the commission, because I've sent a couple of emails to the commission and I don't think that it's working. I sent one last week with some announcements, and I actually sent one yesterday. So if nobody got those, I think we have a governance issue, which is, you know, our communications issue. I don't know if the executive committee might want to take a look at that. I logged into the Google group this morning just to double check, and I didn't see my messages. So I guess I'm not surprised. I saw a number of you shaking your heads that you didn't get those. But they're in my outbox as sent. So I think we've got perhaps a problem with our communications. And Morgan, I noticed when you sent out the link for today's meeting, you sent it just to specific names and didn't use the Google group. So I wasn't sure if that was because you had realized there was a problem or.
No, it's because the Google group has half of commissioners who aren't on the commission anymore. So I don't want to inundate them with stuff that they're not a part of anymore. But Jessie, I mean, did you get like an error message at all, or is it just simply not functioning?
I got no error message, and it is a communications issue. We moved to the Google group because when we were using people's specific emails, we were missing people. People would mistype, somebody would get left off. There were a lot of hurt feelings when the chains, you know, people would reply all, but somebody would be missing. So we, as a group, made a decision to use that Google group always as our communications platform. So if we don't want to use it because there are a lot of old names on there, perhaps we could take a look at ways to exit folks from that list who are no longer active. But there were really good reasons for using it. So I don't want to forget that we as a group made a choice to do that. But if it's not working, you know, maybe we just need to figure that out.
It's good to know.
Yeah.
Thank you for raising that.
And I want to be sure that I am sharing some information. So when you are ready for that on the agenda.
Yeah, we can do it now. Let me just check with my fellow city colleagues. We don't happen to have anybody waiting by the name of Mary Hansel in the guest room, do we? I just want to make sure they're not left in limbo.
No, not yet, but as soon as I see her, I'll let her in.
Perfect, thank you. All right, Jessie, the floor is yours.
I didn't mean to grab the floor back from you.
No, you take the time because it would be an awkward silence.
Well, the message I sent last week that apparently nobody got was an announcement from the U.S. Women's Bureau, and they had some really great programming that looked like it was connected to our workforce equity. So I will try to resend that or get it out to everybody. I can use the names, Morgan, that you used, but again, I want to be cautious of not missing somebody. But there was some wonderful programming. So that was last week's announcement. Perhaps more relevant and top of mind to me for today was the message I sent yesterday, which was asking if we might want to consider as a group putting out a statement about Roe v. Wade and thinking about, particularly, I was looking at the CEDAW language around reproductive justice. And, you know, the call for abortion is absolutely central to human rights and the way that CEDAW imagines international human rights. So I think there's some really great established language. I was trying to share out a document, in fact, that pulls together the CEDAW language with disability rights language, which I thought was a really strong statement. And I know at the march on Saturday, folks were really talking about the way in which Pittsburgh is quite likely to become very central for folks from the surrounding states who may be coming here to receive healthcare. So I don't know if that brings up any kinds of policy positions or things we might want to talk about from a legislative or just sort of supportive, you know, what kinds of conversations should we be having in Pittsburgh to talk about how we support folks accessing healthcare here. But at the very least, I'd love to see us consider putting out some kind of statement. I felt like our voice was kind of missing from that march on Saturday, and I'd love to see us in there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So do you foresee this on our website? Because we don't have social media.
Yeah, in the past, when we've put statements out like this, we've released them on the website and in our newsletter. And then we've individually, privately used our own social media to push those messages. I know we're not ready for a social media conversation. That's in the future, but yeah. So I just think that even though we're sort of on pause and trying to keep ourselves going, this just feels so big to me.
Absolutely. I mean, that goes without saying. So too bad we didn't get the email, because we could have thought about the statement in a working session today. But I mean, obviously I'm all here for statements and making sure our voice is heard with that. But, you know, I want us to, I don't want it to just be like a statement for statement's sake, but like, what are we actively doing in response to that? So it's like what you said, what conversations are we having? Who are we partnering with? Who are we leveraging? Because, you know, we're not inventing this conversation. We're trying to raise up the efforts that are being done on the ground. And I had even considered bringing somebody in this month to talk about Roe v. Wade. But we had already scheduled Mary. So that conversation can still be had. But thank you, Jesse. I think, you know, this is what we're here to do, right? And there goes Sloan. Was there anything else that we missed, Jesse, that you wanted to raise?
I did have one other thing, because I had my meeting with the mayor.
Oh, how'd that go?
It was a lovely meeting.
Yes.
Last week. I don't know who else has had their meeting, but I learned that, and I'm sorry we're not in work session, but I don't want to wait a month to discuss the fact that there appears to be some question as to whether or not we actually have a line item in the budget for a staff member. So there was some discussion in my meeting about looking into that. So Morgan, I guess this was sort of a question for you, but our mayor was not sure that we are budgeted for our executive director, which was shocking. And Janet, I was curious if you knew anything about that.
I would not expect the mayor to know that that is in the budget, but I do know that I did work with the Office of Management and Budget, and I will reach out to my respective point of contact. But I'm not surprised if the mayor would not know. I mean, because he has responsibility for so much. And to know that finite detail, I wouldn't expect him. What I do know is that it was in when it was presented at the table for approval at City Council last December. So I would just have to follow up.
Yeah, he seemed to be under the impression that it had actually been removed. So I don't know if that happened or if there's just some confusion, but it almost sounded like they weren't moving forward on hiring an executive director because there wasn't budget for it.
Well, and if that's the case, I would not know if it was removed. But I do know that it was in the budget. I would just have to ask a representative from Office of Management and Budget, because I don't, that's new news to me. I don't know.
Yeah, that's why it felt new to me as well. Thank you, Janet.
Yeah.
Janet, you and I can work behind the scenes to do some sleuthing on that.
Sure.
Yeah. Thank you, Jesse. Hey, Sloan, we are just talking about announcements we may have missed. I don't know if you've had any problem receiving messages from the gender equity Google groups on your email.
I thought you were going to say your email with the agenda, and I was like, no, I got all of that.
Good.
I read through all of those. I haven't thought about the Google group. Let me toggle over there.
The question. Okay.
Let me toggle over and see.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jesse. You've given us some homework, but we got to keep busy. We have to keep busy. And then speaking about mayor's office updates, I don't know any of you have seen, but for folks who are watching and haven't known this, the transition report has been released. I mean, I'm just in awe of the fact that so many advocates and activists across the city who represent so many groups and lived experiences have, for the past couple of months, put together a whole series of policy recommendations. And as mentioned, as the commission knows, I did send over our policy recommendations to the team. So based off of what I've seen so far, there's just so much overlap that, I mean, there's just such a window of opportunity here to see some of our suggestions hopefully come through in this administration. So if you haven't seen it, you can go to gainingtransition.com and at the top, you'll see transition recommendations. It's a pretty hefty document, so it's a good morning read. Or if you're on the T or on the bus reading in the morning, it's a good way to see what our city's advocates have come up with. And then as we are still awaiting our guest, I did want to open the floor for any announcements across the board. Sloan, you have been really busy. I would love to know what you've been up to in your line of work. I think you were hanging out with Bill Clinton, just like tell us how that's going.
Oh, yes. And he is such an extroverted orator. Like when I tell you I was seated at table 1 for dinner and the man spoke for 4 hours on a glass of water and half a can of Diet Coke. I was like, should we be eating? Should we be eating? He geopolitical, like weaving in stories and tales. It was like really interesting. Yeah, I was down in Little Rock. What's been going on? Hello Neighbor just, is continuing to scale across the region. So we've now welcomed 206 Afghans. Hello Neighbor has across the 4 resettlement agencies, which is also JFCS, Ajapo, and Bethany. There's over 700 that have come in. There was just an announcement with Senator Williams the other day, and acting Secretary of State Meg Snead for DHS, and a few other folks on a bill that they're introducing specific to Ukrainian support that they worked with the 4 resettlement agencies on. And we did a really nice briefing over at JFCS for about an hour and a half the other day with a number of their staffers as well, just like updating on Refugee Baseline 101, like even outside Ukrainian, but just like what's going on in the region. We talk a lot about things that you all know affect everybody: housing, mental health, basic support services. Like we covered all the bases: youth, learning loss, everything that affects all marginalized groups across the city affect our English language learners. And so we talked about all of those things. And in terms of the Little Rock work and some of that's tied to the national program we do. So the Hello Neighbor Network is where we connect other leaders that work with refugees and immigrants on how they're scaling. And we have 100 members in 40 states. And we're actually bringing about 60 of those folks to Pittsburgh for our annual convening that's happening the 7th, 8th, and 9th. We just put out the request for the mayor and some other folks to attend and to give some comments and some words. But we have 32 states, I think, that'll be represented. They're going to come in, and we like to show off Pittsburgh and the welcoming work that's happening here. Some of the and then we have a number of speakers and things that are happening. And then we end with site visits. So we'll actually be visiting the mayor's office and county council on the morning of June 9th. And then we're doing a couple of other site visits that morning. So
well, hopefully I'll see you when you come visit.
I know. I'd love to do that. Yes. And I should mention, even though I was just in Little Rock a few months before that, I was down at SMU with President Bush, who his most recent book is about immigrants and refugees. He included Hello Neighbor in that. And so it's been really nice to see the bipartisan support of former presidents for the work.
Thank you. You are doing the work, Sloan. We appreciate you. So keep us posted
all of you
on what's happening in that space, and if there's anything that the GEC can assist with. Without further ado, I do see our guest. Hello, Mary. Thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully you can hear us and see us okay.
I'm so sorry I'm late. I don't know. I got the time difference wrong, but added a half hour weirdly. So I thought it was in
It's
one.
fine. Listen, in these pandemic times, what does time mean anymore? So we're here now. It's perfect timing. We were able to catch up and do what we had to do on our end. But I will ask Judy to give a brief introduction of you, Mary, and we can go ahead and get started.
Right. So I invited Mary Hansel to join us today as a guest speaker to talk about CEDAW. I met her when we were both panelists at a public forum for San Diego County, California, to talk about passing a CEDAW ordinance, the Convention to Eliminate All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. That's the U.S. Women's Rights Treaty that the United States has not ratified. And that is something that there's a campaign to ratify that at the local, municipal, and county level in the United States, and Mary's been involved in that. She is a professor at the University of California, Irvine School of Law, and the director of the Global Gender Justice Project. Her areas of expertise include intersectional gender justice, business and human rights, especially in the technology sector, human rights as applied to the US, including at state and local levels, and transitional justice. And Mary, I will want to ask you, I'll hand the mic to you and ask you to add anything else you want to your introduction. And then please take the floor.
Okay, great, thanks. Just so I'm clear, is this a public forum so that we have?
We're live. So we're live streamed, and this is also recorded and available on YouTube. So we're here for posterity. No pressure.
No pressure. So it will be forever memorialized that I came late, but
Your timing was perfect. It really was.
So thank you so much to Judy and the other members of Pittsburgh's Gender Equity Commission for the invitation to speak with you all today. I'm thrilled to talk about one of my favorite topics, CEDAW, and learn more about the tremendous work that your CEDAW program has been doing. As Judy mentioned, my name is Mary Hansel. I'm an international human rights attorney and scholar focused on intersectional gender justice in an area referred to as human rights at home, which applies a human rights lens to the US at all levels of government. I've taught several courses on international human rights and led 2 law school clinics conducting human rights advocacy across the globe. I've litigated before UN bodies, including the CEDAW committee, which I'll discuss in a bit, regional human rights courts, and of course, US courts. I'm currently a member of the advisory committee for Cities for CEDAW. I proposed and worked on LA County's CEDAW ordinance, and I consulted on San Diego's CEDAW ordinance, which, as I'll discuss, just passed last week. So today I'm going to cover a few topics. I thought I'd start out by providing some background information about CEDAW and local CEDAW implementation for those who may not be as familiar. Apologies in advance to CEDAW experts who will already be familiar with some of that. Then I'll briefly discuss my work on LA County's CEDAW ordinance passed in late 2021 and San Diego's CEDAW ordinance passed just last week. And I'll conclude with a few thoughts I have on how to strengthen CEDAW measures. So I don't think I'll speak for more than 20 or 30 minutes. And hopefully we can have a discussion and answer some questions after I present, but I really encourage you to raise any questions during my presentation to keep the session interactive. Since everyone's online, I guess the best way to do that is the chat or
there's no chat. So it's just going to be us in this Zoom room. There aren't public attendees. So
there aren't public attendees. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
So please just interject with questions anytime you see fit. Great. So I'd love this to feel more like a conversation than me presenting. In fact, I was originally planning to bring slides, but then I thought that might detract from, the sort of interactive nature. So I thought I'd start off by situating CEDAW and the Cities for CEDAW movement within the broader international human rights landscape. As you likely know, the UN Convention to Eliminate All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, known as CEDAW, is a core human rights treaty and the principal legal instrument for ensuring gender-based rights across the globe. CEDAW was adopted by the UN in 1979 and went into effect in 1981. CEDAW is one of 9 core human rights treaties at the global level. Out of these 9, by the way, the US has only ratified 3 of them. These are the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the Convention Against Torture, and the Convention against the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. So many different prepositions. Okay, CEDAW is the 2nd most ratified global treaty. The most ratified treaty is the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which has been ratified by every country except 1. And you may or may not be surprised to learn that that one is the US. So it was the US and Somalia until Somalia did the right thing a few years ago. So the rights enshrined in CEDAW promote gender justice in every area of life: civil, political, economic, social, and cultural. These rights, of course, apply through an intersectional lens, which recognizes a broad range of intersecting identities, broader, in fact, than the protected classes recognized under US law. In addition to setting forth substantive rights, CEDAW delineates the mandate of an oversight body called the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, the CEDAW Committee. So the CEDAW Committee issues authoritative interpretations of the treaty, focused recommendations to governments following periodic reviews, and quasi-judicial decisions on complaints alleging treaty violations. So these interpretive statements, targeted recommendations, and case decisions give detailed meaning to the text of the treaty, and they make sure the treaty's provisions remain dynamic, keeping pace with evolving gender discourses. So when you read the text of CEDAW, which again was drafted in 1979, it may seem anachronistic, right? It seems out of date and frankly, just not relevant to today's discourses regarding gender. But, you know, just like the US Constitution, the treaty really shouldn't be taken at face value. This is because, also like our Constitution, the treaty is made a living instrument relevant to contemporary society through the ongoing continuous guidance provided by the CEDAW Committee, somewhat similar to how our Constitution is made living and relevant through the ongoing guidance provided by the US Supreme Court, although there's more I could say about that these days, but I'll resist. So CEDAW has been ratified by every country in the world except for 6. These 6 are Iran, Sudan, Somalia, Palau, and Tonga in the US. So quick political science refresher: to become a party to a treaty, the US government needs to both sign and ratify the instrument. President Carter actually did sign CEDAW a mere months, after it was finalized. So he signed it in 1980, but decades later, we still haven't ratified it. Under the US Constitution, 2/3 of the Senate are needed to ratify a treaty, which means that a bipartisan vote is likely needed, which of course has gotten harder and harder to secure. So while I'm certainly supportive of the ratify CEDAW movement, I can't say I'm all that optimistic. So there have been 3 ratification attempts in the Senate, but it's never made it to the floor. If you read the Senate debates about ratification, which are fascinating, by the way, you'll see a strong sense of American exceptionalism. This idea that the US doesn't need this treaty because we're already so advanced in our gender equity. And we certainly don't need to be told what to do by a UN body. So how am I doing on time? Do I want to give this footnote? Just a quick footnote, if you're interested in the law of international treaties. So CEDAW is signed but not ratified, but there is actual legal significance to that. So the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties provides that when a country signs but fails to ratify a treaty, the country cannot take any action which would violate the object and purpose of the treaty. The object and purpose of CEDAW is to eliminate discrimination against women with a view to achieving substantive equality. So technically, even though it hasn't ratified CEDAW, the US cannot take any action that's antithetical to this object and purpose. So anyway, in response to the US's failure to ratify the treaty, grassroots advocates have focused on passing local measures, as you know, that embody the key principles of CEDAW while addressing salient issues facing individual jurisdictions. So a grassroots movement referred to as Cities for CEDAW has coalesced around the adoption of these measures. Local governments have passed over 40 CEDAW resolutions and I think around 15 CEDAW ordinances. And these measures have brought about remarkable successes in gender justice and helped cultivate, just a human rights awareness at local levels. So importantly, even if the US does ratify CEDAW, we will still likely need this movement to promote local implementation. And this is because when the US ratifies human rights treaties, it attaches what are called RUDs, which is an acronym for reservations, understandings, and declarations. And these RUDs are sort of caveats. They're qualifications that a country makes when ratifying. And the US's favorite RUD states that the treaty is non-self-executing, which effectively means that it has no effect no domestic effect, I should say, unless Congress takes further action. So when the US ratifies a human rights treaty, it adds a statement that says, yeah, but this doesn't actually apply to us unless we then take legislative action. And there's every reason to think that the Senate will add this RUD if they do in fact ratify CEDAW. So that means that you'll still need the grassroots movement to have the treaty applied domestically. Okay. So any questions about this background context?
Mary, I don't have any questions, but what I am curious of is, as a gender justice and intersectional gender justice, say that 5 times fast, attorney, what your day-to-day has been looking like now with Roe v. Wade. In the light of American exceptionalism, right? Where there's rainbows and unicorns, and we have this very clear assault and attack on choice. What kind of behind the scenes work have you been up to, or at least what partners have you engaged in, or is it just, you want to just set it all on fire? Like, can you tell us about what that's looking like on your end from this like CEDAW expertise?
Yeah, I wish I had some great news, but I think that, a couple things from like a legal technical standpoint. I hope that when the Dobbs decision is released, that the counsel for Jackson has actually brings the case to the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. So when you lose at the Supreme Court, you can actually bring your case to a regional human rights body called the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, which is actually located in Washington, D.C., but most lawyers don't even know about this. And you litigate the case, but the case, of course, is reframed as a violation of human rights. The Inter-American Commission already has case law showing that denying access to abortion is problematic under relevant regional human rights standards. Of course, the problem is that when you get a judgment from a human rights body, be it at the regional or UN level, you then have to try to enforce that judgment. And the US has lots of judgments against it issued by the Inter-American Commission, most in the context of the death penalty. I actually litigated one and won, and my client was actually executed last August of 2020 when there was that reopening of the federal death penalty. It was horrible, and it flew in the face of everything the Inter-American Commission do. So I'm not hopeful, but I think there's value in reframing this as a human rights violation, right? Out of step with what other nations are doing. I mean, look at Colombia, and Mexico, and the strides they've made in abortion rights. So I think there's value in that. I also think there's value in having, so the State Department litigates against you when you bring cases to the Inter-American Commission. And I think it would be interesting to see what the State Department says to try to defend a Supreme Court ruling. Anyway, so that's just my nerdy law answer. But in terms of general advocacy strategy, I do think it's important to bring up comparative examples, right? Ireland, Colombia, Mexico in our work, and just how out of step and regressive we are in this regard. Yeah, so I could go down a whole rabbit hole, but anyway, bringing that case to the Inter-American Commission though is I really hope that happens, and sort of a bee in my bonnet. Any other questions about the human rights landscape before I move on? Okay. So next, I just want to talk a bit about our CEDAW advocacy in LA County and the recent San Diego ordinance. So I actually first learned about local CEDAW implementation in the US while teaching a law school course entitled Human Rights at Home. And I thought it was an ingenious circumvention of the Senate's failure to ratify the treaty. And a year or two later, I was out to lunch with my contact who leads LA County's Commission on Human Relations and asked him why the county, didn't have a CEDAW ordinance yet. And he said, hey, you should propose one. So I worked with my students to come up with a proposal and spent 3 years conducting in-depth factual and legal research on CEDAW and local implementation. We prepared a series of briefing papers for the county and gave a series of presentations to various decision makers. And then last November, LA County adopted a CEDAW ordinance. And I should note, however, that this is the first of 2 ordinances. They sort of bifurcated their ordinance into the substantive ordinance and what will hopefully be the enforcement portion of the ordinance. And my sense is that this is due to internal logistical issues rather than any other sort of strategy. So then in terms of San Diego, out of curiosity, has anyone been following the journey of San Diego's CEDAW ordinance? Oh. So I've been a consultant for the ordinance, which is quite strong and progressive in many ways. The San Diego Board of Supervisors voted unanimously to develop the ordinance late last year. And then to its credit, the CEDAW task force leading the drafting of the ordinance held 2 public forums, which Judy spoke at, to gather resident input on the measure. And at those forums, we started to hear voices of staunch opposition to the measure. Some people were opposed to the measure's inclusion of transgender community members. This opposition then grew and grew over the weeks, fueled by some jaw-dropping misinformation and fundamental misunderstandings about the measure. In fact, the fierce opposition was on the local news in San Diego, and 2 of the 5 supervisors who had voted in favor of the measure's development ended up voting against the measure on its tentative and final approval. And they cited their belief that the measure would in fact discriminate against cisgender women. The head of the CEDAW task force in San Diego and I published an op-ed trying to clarify and dispel the myths floating around because they were and still are so pervasive. But thankfully, the ordinance passed last week with a 3-2 vote. But it was, a real sort of battleground for gender inclusivity. and certainly a lesson for CEDAW advocacy going forward. So any questions about that before I move on to my suggestions? Yeah, Jesse.
Mary, thank you for that. Also, thank you for fighting the good fight on behalf of gender inclusivity. That sounds like a terrible thing, a terrible battle. I'm sorry that we weren't tracking that. We were so proud here in Pittsburgh to write the word intersectional into our ordinance. And at the time we did that, I know that we were the first. I don't know if we are still the only. Are we still the only ordinance that uses that word, or have others added it?
You all are real trendsetters. And I can't think of an ordinance after you all passed your ordinance that was not explicitly intersectional. And I hope, I hope I hope that continues. Yeah. So one of the reasons I was so excited to speak to you all is because of the renown of your CEDAW program and what a great job you're doing. Any other questions about advocacy, my experiences? Okay, so I thought I would end with a selection of ideas for how to strengthen CEDAW measures going forward. And some of these ideas might be a fit for Pittsburgh and some may not. I mean, the beauty of CEDAW is that there's no one size fits all and it's customized for each jurisdiction. So under human rights law, right, governments have an obligation to, promote gender justice, not just eliminate gender discrimination, meaning that it's not enough for governments to make sure they're not being discriminatory. They should be taking proactive steps to fulfill the rights of their residents and protect these rights from interference. So these ideas are with this sort of proactive approach in mind. The first is about data collection. One of the, if not the defining feature of CEDAW measures is the outlined process for collecting and analyzing intersectional gender data, right? This is really the heart of CEDAW measures because it creates a baseline understanding of where the jurisdiction is in terms of gender justice and where it needs to get. And then if you do the data collection and analysis on a repeat basis, you get a sense of what's working and what's not, and what other needs might arise, right? It keeps the CEDAW ordinance living. So in my view, data collection should be periodic and resident-wide. And my understanding across the country is that some are periodic and some are not, but ideally they should be happening, every few years or so. Of course, that depends on local resources, etc. What I mean by resident-wide is that a lot of jurisdictions seem to be collecting data internally from about the local government itself, rather than looking at the community and what its needs are and its demographics, and then sort of adjusting service provision accordingly. And so both of those things need to be happening in an ideal world. So that's the first idea to strengthen CEDAW measures. The second is, and this doesn't really apply to you all, that all CEDAW measures should be explicitly intersectional throughout their provisions. And again, we tip our hats to Pittsburgh as a trailblazer in this regard. The third idea for strengthening CEDAW measures is to create channels for CEDAW committee guidance. So I spent some time describing the interpretive guidance that the UN CEDAW committee provides on an ongoing basis. And I'm biased as a human rights lawyer, but to me, it's a bit of a waste that local jurisdictions are not informed about this ongoing guidance and engaging with it, and deciding whether it makes sense to consider and create services that reflect that guidance. So for example, CEDAW recently issued some guidance regarding the gendered impacts of climate change. And they just gave a really beautiful, what's called a general recommendation, describing all of the multifaceted ways that gender and climate change intersect. And of course, how gender justice can be a real key to climate justice. And so I just think the guidance they create, right? The committee is composed of 23 gender justice experts from across the globe. And I think that their guidance not only keeps the treaty itself relevant, but can really help CEDAW programs at the local level. So that's my third idea. My fourth is to create channels for regular input from civil society organizations and local stakeholders. These are the experts on local needs and priorities in many ways, and their involvement can provide a form of public accountability and ensure that local CEDAW programs remain dynamic. I say this mindful of confidentiality concerns that some local governments had, because I've run into that with LA County, but again, ideally, the more sort of local stakeholder involvement, the better. My fifth idea to strengthen CEDAW measures is to create public education campaigns. For example, to combat harmful stereotypes and promote healthy ideas about masculinity. And then my final way to strengthen CEDAW measures is to explore a private sector initiative. One model for promoting gender justice in the private sector was actually developed in San Francisco in connection with its CEDAW program. San Francisco passed a measure with a set of what they called gender equality principles that companies based in the Bay Area signed on to. San Francisco then rolled out a series of carrots, right, to incentivize company compliance with the principles. So for example, they would have dinners celebrating the company that made the most strides in gender justice that year. So it didn't take a lot of resources to run this program, but because of that peer pressure that companies felt with each other, they all signed on and all sort of wanted to outdo each other. So notably, these principles were actually then adopted by the UN. So the UN Global Compact took their principles from San Francisco and they call them, and you might have heard of them, the Women Empowerment Principles. So we love this idea. So we actually took both San Francisco's principles and the UN principles, did a lot of research and came up with our own principles that cover all of what's covered by those. And have pitched that to LA County, and we hope they implement it at some point. But I'd love to see as many jurisdictions as possible start to explore private sector initiatives. So just to give you a sense of the proposed program, I thought I'd list the 7 topics that are addressed in detail by the principles. These are management and governance. So this is within the companies, remember. So management and governance, employment compensation and equitable treatment, health, safety, and freedom from violence, access to education and trading, media depictions, including marketing and advertising, and business decisions, including the selection of business partners, community engagement and advocacy, and transparency and accountability through concrete measures. So I list these just to give a sense of how comprehensive this initiative can be. It's well beyond sort of a diversity initiative that can sometimes lead to, serve as window dressing for deeper changes in the private sector, I think. So in conclusion, oh my gosh, I have 7 minutes. Okay, in conclusion, I published a Ms. Magazine article that lists some other thoughts. I can put that link in the chat, but I just want to close by underscoring the aspect of local CEDAW implementation that I find most inspiring. International human rights, even though we tend to think of it as a concept that applies elsewhere or in other countries, or if at all to the US, then at the federal level. International human rights has always meant to be applied locally, right, in our own backyard. So local implementation is the key to real world change. And even if you get a victory at the global level or regional level, it means very little until it's implemented close to home, right? So I'll close with the Eleanor Roosevelt quote, where after all do universal human rights begin? In small places close to home. Unless these rights have meaning there, they have little meaning anywhere. Without concerted citizen action to uphold them close to home, we shall look in vain for progress in the larger world. And I think that nicely encapsulates Cities for CEDAW. Okay, 6 minutes left. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
And Mary, I want to say thank you for your presentation. And you hit on something that I've been having conversations with my private sector HR peers, and that is about the work of CEDAW and how it is not really done in the private sector. So I'm very pleased to hear you talk about that there's conversation initially, but how can we bring that conversation? I'm all about the Berg, and I'm appreciative of California and everything, but since the Berg, we're already trendsetting with what we're doing here for the Gender Equity Commission. How can we elevate that conversation, and what are some tips that you can share with me that I can take back with my HR colleagues in the private sector so that way they can start this conversation? It's one thing to have government, whether it's local, state, or federal, and we're always looking at the broader picture for the greater good. And sometimes the private sector doesn't always, or I shouldn't say that. Sometimes the private sector doesn't think they have an impact. Whereas in this aspect of work, I really believe that they can be very effective. So how can we start that conversation? You gave the example of California, and that's great, but I'm biased. What are some things for the Berg that we can do? Because we have a lot of great institutions here that are pretty well known worldwide, right? You've got the PNCs, you've got from the healthcare markets, you've got the banking, BNY Mellon, PNC, et cetera. How can we start there with those heavy hitters that could help us spread that message abroad from a private sector standpoint? Because I think it's needed.
Yeah, great question. Thanks for that. I think that COVID-19 has really laid bare both existing inequalities and, exacerbated those inequalities. And I think I don't know that you can still deny that the private sector has a really profound impact on gender justice. And just, sorry, another legal nerdy footnote, the way employment law works, right? If you experience any form of discrimination, the employee has to raise that concern, thereby risking their livelihood, right? Their ability to put food on the table. And, we also know that 70% of employees who raise issues of sexual harassment or discrimination are retaliated against. And that's not even counting those who don't raise issues because they see what's going to happen to them. So to me, that's just like a flawed model in terms of enforcing the laws. Like, you can have the best laws in the world. California has amazing employment laws for employees, and yet, these problems persist because of this model. So I think if nothing else, like having a set of principles that companies sign on to and adhere to, like, adds a different pressure point for them to, promote gender justice. So, and the way it would work is that rather than just have them sign on to this vague set of principles that, sound really nice, but don't have any sort of bite. The thing I like about this initiative is that it's anchored in the local government. So the way it worked in San Francisco, they actually codified the principles into local law. And then you have that as a reference. I think it gives legitimacy. It shows a level of oversight. You know, I don't think there's any sort of sticks available, but there's certainly carrots so that you can publicize who's doing great. And that, again, puts pressure on companies who are not doing great. There's other tools that the UN has actually created that are great, that allow companies to actually fill out an assessment of how they're doing online, and then get a report on how they can improve. And it's all confidential. And then, you know, aggregated statistics are made available to the local jurisdiction. So there's sort of tools like that that provide, you know, concrete metrics. And, you know, I think a lot of company owners actually do want to sort of do the right thing, but they don't know how. So this program gives them the information of what to do. You know, they're like, okay, we know we need to like have pay equity, but like, what else are we supposed to do? And there's a lot else they're supposed to do. And I think these principles really lay that out. And then the linkage to the local government really provides an additional legitimacy and additional hook, like a teeth. And last thing I'll say is, from a human rights standpoint, local governments are not just responsible for the direct line between them and their community members. They're responsible to protect their residents' rights from interference by third parties, which includes companies. So we in the US have a very sort of like hands-off approach in government, and that's actually out of whack with what's required of governments at all levels under international human rights law.
Thank you so much. I unfortunately have a hard stop at 5. But I really sincerely spending your time with the Gender Equity Commission here in Pittsburgh this afternoon, and just providing us an expertise lens of how CEDAW functions and the nitty-gritties. I wish we had more time. But again, thank you. It is much appreciated. So being that it's 5 o'clock, I will be respectful of people's time. City friends, are there any public comments from folks?
There is no one currently in the waiting room.
Okay. Are there any last things, like super last minute?
I can share Mary's contact information with the Gender Equity Commissioner.
Yes.
Yeah. And in fact, Mary, if you want to send me, I think you talked about a Ms. Magazine article and maybe the links to the LA and the UN principles. If you want, you and I can touch base, and then I can send like some kind of follow-ups with information that we discussed or that was mentioned today to the commissioners. Okay.
Yes.
Sounds great. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for your time.
Good night.
Yes.
Happy election day, everyone.
Yeah.
Happy election day.
Happy election day.